Carl Jung was asked one question more than any other. What happens when we meet God after death? And Jung would pause, a long pause, and he would say, "You do not meet God, you become God, or rather, you remember, you always were." People were shocked. One student stood up and said, "That is blasphemy. You are saying we are God." And Jung smiled, a strange smile, and said, "No, I am saying God is not what you think, and death is not what you think, and when you die, you will understand what I mean." The student left angry, but years later, on his own deathbed, he wrote a letter to Jung. One sentence, "You were right, I see it now." Jung kept that letter until he died, and in his final lecture, 1960, months before his death, he finally revealed what he discovered about meeting God after death and why most people are not ready for what happens. So what happens when you meet God after death? Let me show you. The first thing Jung discovered about meeting God after death is that you do not meet God because you cannot meet what you already are. Jung wrote, "People think God is separate, up there, waiting to judge them. But God is not separate. God is what you are, beneath the person." Here is what Jung meant. When you are alive, you believe you are the person, the ego, the separate self, and from that perspective, God seems somewhere else, up there, outside of you. But Jung discovered this is the illusion. The person, the ego, is what separates you from God. Not distance, not sin, just identification with the separate self. And when you die, the person ends, the ego dissolves, and what remains is what was always there, beneath the person, the soul, which is not separate from God. The soul is God, experiencing itself as you. Jung wrote, "When you die, you do not meet God, you recognize God in yourself, and you realize you were never separate. The separation was the illusion of being the person." So meeting God after death is not an encounter, it is a recognition of what you always were, but forgot. And here is what Jung discovered. Most people are not ready for that recognition. So why are most people not ready to meet God after death? Jung discovered it is not because God rejects them, it is because they reject God in themselves. Here is what Jung meant. Your entire life you have been taught that you are separate from God, that God is up there, holy, perfect, divine, and you are down here, sinful, broken, unworthy. And this belief, this separation, becomes your identity. You believe you are not God. You are just human, just the person. And when you die and you realize you are God, you were always God, there is terror, not joy. Terror, because everything you believed about yourself was wrong. Jung said the ego cannot accept that it is God, because if you are God, then the ego never existed. It was always just a dream. God dreaming it was separate. And the ego does not want to die, even after the body dies. So it resists, it fights, it says, "No, I am not God. I am me, the person. I cannot be God." And that resistance, Jung said, is hell, not fire, not punishment, but the refusal to recognize God in yourself. Jung had a patient once, a religious woman, dying of cancer. She told Jung, "I am afraid of meeting God. He will judge me for my sins." And Jung said, God will not judge you. You will judge yourself by refusing to see that you and God were never separate. The woman did not understand. She died still believing she was separate. And Jung wrote, she carried that separation into death, and it became her hell, not because God punished her, but because she could not accept what she became. But here is what happens when you finally accept it.
So what is God? According to Jung, if God is not up there, not separate, not a being waiting, then what is God? Jung said, God is consciousness, pure awareness, that is experiencing itself through you, through me, through everything. Here is what Jung discovered. Before you were born, before the person existed, there was consciousness, pure, infinite, aware. And that consciousness wanted to experience itself, so it became you, me, everything. Not as separate things, but as expressions of itself. Jung wrote, God did not create you, God became you. And when you die, you do not go to God, you return to being, what you always were, God experiencing the end of being you. Think about it. Right now, you are aware of reading these words. But who is aware? Not the person, not the body, not the thoughts. Something deeper, the awareness itself, that witness behind everything. That, Jung said, is God. And when you die, the person ends, the body ends, but the awareness, the consciousness, does not end, because it was never born. It just stops pretending to be the person, and returns to being what it always was, infinite, eternal, God. Jung said, this is why death is not the end of you, because you were never just you. You were always God pretending to be you. And death is when God stops pretending. And here is what Jung discovered. In that moment, when God stops pretending, something happens that most people never expect.
So what happens in that moment when God stops pretending to be you? Jung described it from his own near-death experience in 1944. His heart stopped for several minutes, and he said, I was not in my body. I was not Carl Jung. I was everything and nothing at the same time. He described a moment of complete recognition where he realized, I am what I have been seeking my entire life. I am God. I always was. I just forgot. And in that recognition, Jung said there was no fear, no judgment, no separation, just complete, overwhelming peace. He wrote, it was not like meeting someone. It was like remembering what I always knew before I was born, that I am not separate from anything. I am the awareness that is everything. But here is what Jung warned. That recognition can be unbearable if you spent your entire life defending the ego, believing you are the person. Jung said, imagine you wake up from a dream and you realize your entire life was the dream. everything you thought you were never existed, that moment of waking can be devastating or liberating, depending on how attached you were to the dream. And most people are very attached to the dream of being the person. So when they meet God and realize God is them, they cannot accept it. Jung saw this in his work with dying patients. One man on his deathbed said to Jung, "I feel like I am dissolving into everything, and it terrifies me." And Jung said, "You are not dissolving. You are expanding into what you always were before you became just a person." But the man could not accept it. He died fighting to remain the person, even though the person was already gone. And Jung wrote, "This is the tragedy, not death, but dying while still clinging to the illusion that you are only the person." But here is what Jung discovered about those who let go. What happens to those who let go of the person before death comes? Jung saw both deaths, those who clung and those who surrendered, and the difference was everything. He described one patient, an old monk, dying peacefully. Jung asked him, "Are you afraid?" And the monk smiled and said, "Afraid of what? I am going home to what I always was before I pretended to be this." And he died 3 hours later. And Jung said, "I have never seen such a peaceful death, because he let go of being the person years before. And when death came, it was not an ending, it was a returning." This is what Jung taught, that you do not have to wait for death to meet God. You can meet God now by letting go of the person, by recognizing the awareness that you are is not separate from God. Jung said, meditation, prayer, silence, these are not ways to reach God. They are ways to stop being the person long enough to recognize you were always God. And here is the practice that Jung gave. Sit in silence and ask yourself, who am I? Not what am I? Not what do I do? But who is aware right now? And do not answer with words. Just notice the awareness itself. That witness behind the question, that is God, not separate from you, but what you are beneath the person. Jung wrote, if you practice this every day, then when death comes, you will not be afraid, because you already know what you are. You already met God by recognizing God in yourself. But here is what Jung discovered about what God does after you recognize it.
So what does God do after you recognize it, after you realize you are God? Jung discovered something unexpected. He wrote, God does not keep you as God. God sends you back again and again until you become fully conscious of what you are. Here is what Jung meant. When you die and recognize God in yourself, you do not stay there in that infinite awareness forever. You return to another life, another body, another person. Why? Because Jung said, God wants to know itself completely through every experience, every perspective, every life. And you are how God does that. This is why reincarnation exists, not as punishment, not as reward, but as God's way of experiencing itself through you, again and again, until you become fully conscious that you are God while alive. Jung wrote, "Most people die and recognize God for a moment, but then they forget again, and they return to another life, still believing they are just the person, and the cycle continues, until one life when they remember while alive that they are God. And when that happens, when you know while alive that you are God," Jung said, "then you are free, not free from life, but free in life. You live knowing you are not just the person, you are God experiencing this life, and death becomes not an ending, but just another experience of God." This is what Jung called enlightenment, not becoming something new, but remembering what you always were, God. And here is the final truth that Jung discovered.
The final truth that Jung discovered about meeting God after death. He said it in his final lecture, 1960, months before he died. One sentence that changed everything. He said, "You will not meet God after death, because you are meeting God right now, in this moment. You just do not know it." Read that again. You are meeting God right now. Every moment you are aware, every moment you exist, you are experiencing God, because you are God, experiencing itself as you. Jung wrote, "People wait their entire lives to meet God after death, but God is not later, God is now. The awareness, reading these words, that is God meeting itself." And here is what this means. When you die, you will not go somewhere. You will not become something. You will simply stop pretending that you are not God. The person will end. The body will end. But you, the real you, the awareness, will remain unchanged, eternal, free. Jung said, "Death is not the moment you meet God. Death is the moment you stop hiding from God in yourself." And this, Jung said, is why he was not afraid when his time came. He died in 1961, at home, peacefully, and his last words to his wife were, "I am going now to what I always was. Do not be sad. I am not leaving. I am just remembering." And he closed his eyes and died, knowing what most people never know, that death is not the end. It is the return to God, which is what you are, what you always were, what you will always be. You just forgot for a while. Conclusion. So here is what Carl Jung discovered about meeting God after death. You do not meet God. You recognize God in yourself. Because God is not separate. God is what you are, beneath the person, the soul, the awareness, the consciousness that witnesses everything. When you die, the person ends, the ego dissolves, and what remains?